seen the video on the internet where they're wrapping the chains around the actual drills, and that shit looks real hard.
Throwing chain.
Right?
We're going down 2 miles below the earth.
How do you know that you're going to hit it?
Every single energy company that is not thinking about Bitcoin mining is wrong. I was arrested my senior year of college. It sucked. The DA basically said, we're going to charge you with 3 counts of aggravated assault. And I was like, Dad, let's fight this. That's like, look, I messed up, but like felonies? And so when I came out, I realized, wow, this system's really messed up. And imagine if I didn't have the financial resources I have. So I got interested in criminal justice reform. A lot of us like, what if we started a for-profit business that it wasn't paid per individual? And this was pitched to a few very wealthy individuals that everybody knows. And it's like, we can't be seen investing in a prison deal. I was like, look, I'm Gideon Powell. I don't give a damn. This will effectuate human prosperity. Let's figure out how to do this.
All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got Gideon here with me. I'm super excited to talk about this. Everyone in the world knows that the American economy is made up of so many different types of workers, businesses, but one that gets shit on, one that gets completely lost in kind of the controversy and the debate on a national stage is the oil and gas field workers. And you, your family, so much of what you do on a day-to-day basis, you interact with these people, you've worked with them for a long period of time. And so I thought a great place to start our conversation is just like, help us understand the oil and gas industry and the importance of the actual field worker themselves to sustain not only the industry, but the American economy in general.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things. I appreciate giving me a platform to talk on this because really, you know, we talk about oil and gas and it's obviously needed throughout society. I think there was a lot of push towards, hey, let's, you know, do this energy transition, but it needs to be sustainable. And part of sustainability is profit. So I think really kind of slowing down and thinking about what's going on in the field. And yeah, to your point, so the field workers are the guys that are putting oil in the tanks. And so really, I mean, when there's a weather event, you know, those guys are overcoming adversity. They're overcoming the elements. They're actually in the field, ensuring that oil is coming out of the ground. The gas is coming out of the ground. And that gas is heating our homes. It's powering power plants, which is baseload critical to powering our whole world and, you know, economy. So really the field workers, I think they're one of the most underappreciated throughout society. And, you know, I was telling you the story earlier, but my daughter came home from school one day and she was like, hey, my friends know you're in oil and gas and they don't like you. And I was like, cool. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna wake up tomorrow, 5 a.m., and we're gonna go out to West Texas where we've got a frac operation going on. And to my surprise, she woke up before me and was ready to go. And we drove 3 hours out to West Texas, and you know, we got there. There's about 30 guys, mass amounts of equipment going on, and really, luckily one of our head of engineering was out there, and I was like, hey, Walker, will you introduce her to everybody? And she got to see 30 guys that were working, and I said, Avery, these 30 guys, they're ensuring that we have the fuel needed to power our current modern world. And without these individuals, that wouldn't be possible. And the oil is $10. We were fracking when nobody else was. And there was chaos. Oil just stopped being negative. And she got to see 30 individuals who were able to feed their families because there was this, you know, mutual benefit of we're getting oil out and these guys are making sure it happens. So, you know, and I could have tried to explain that to her, but she saw that perspective and, you know, it made sense to her.
There's an element of humanizing these conversations that I think is really important, right? There's a comedian who has a whole spiel about the term insurgent during the war, right? If you say, hey, we're gonna go kill insurgents, everyone's like, I don't know any insurgents, like kill them all, right? But if you're like, hey, we're gonna go kill humans, everyone, time out, hold on, which humans, why, all of that. Same thing when you bring it to the national debate, and it's not so much a wartime scenario, but we talk about different industries or different types of workers with just this broad-based stroke. You don't know anyone in that industry. You've never met anyone. You don't understand what they do on a day-to-day basis. You may not even understand how that industry works or what that job entails. And so therefore, it's easy to say, I like this one, I don't like this one, because you don't know, right? You're just completely uninformed, you're ignorant. And frankly, most people are just repeating what they've heard on the mainstream media. When you look at these roles of the oil and gas workers, what are they doing on a day-to-day basis? Like you said, they help get the oil into the tanks, right? They're making sure that the natural gas is coming out of the ground, like all these, but like, what are they actually doing? And I'm coming at it super uneducated other than I seen the video on the internet where they're wrapping the chains around the actual drills, and that shit looks real hard.
Throwing chain.
Right?
I worked on a double jackknife rig, and once they found out I was the boss's son, I was not allowed to throw chain. But yeah, so yeah, I think, you know, there's a few kind of key field workers, and I love the convergence of Bitcoin mining and oil and gas, because a lot of the names that have emerged for these positions, we're all going to translate that over to Bitcoin mining as well. But really, there's your pumper. So after you have drilled a well, you know, that is a mechanical operation that goes thousands of feet into the ground. You set casing, which is pipe. Then you have fluids. Then you have cement to ensure that you're protecting the water. But that oil and gas doesn't just come out of the ground. That's a mechanical operation. Things are going to break. So what a pumper does is they're proactively checking on the well. If there's a leak, leaks happen, then the pumper is our first line of defense to ensuring, hey, let's catch it before it gets bad and then remediate the land. So really the pumper kind of floats around and has several different wells, and this covers a large geographic area. And there's talk of, let's automate that, you know, and of course there's efficiencies that, you know, Choa we're evaluating, but you can't ever replace the human that goes out there, makes observations, and then is able to assess what went wrong or what is about to go wrong. So that's kind of another big, you've got to anticipate, and that's where experience matters. So the pumper is in charge of making sure that the wells are performing safely, and, you know, kind of the first line of defense on what could go wrong. And I kind of think about the pumper like I think about, you know, somebody checking on their Bitcoin mines.
All right.
But we'll get there. But yeah, and then there's the Roughneck. And what a Roughneck does.
Great name.
It's yeah. Roughneck is one of the greatest.
I don't know what they do, but I want to be that guy.
So what a Roughneck does is they're kind of a modern nomad. So their job is to operate the drilling rig. So they're the guys on the drilling rig, and that's an offshore drilling rig or that's an onshore drilling rig. And so really they're the guys, and there's a few different ways to manage their schedules. But a lot of guys do, you know, 3 8-hour shifts. And this is a huge capital investment. It's millions of dollars to own a drilling rig. And so you want that working 24/7. I mean, these guys are working over Christmas, over Thanksgiving, over New Year's, over the Super Bowl. I mean, this is a 24/7 operation. And so what they're doing is there's a few different types of roughnecks. There's a tool pusher who's in charge, and then you know, you've got the weasel, the new guy, but really those are the guys that are manning the mechanical operations of putting a hole in the ground. So you're going into the ground, and then, you know, you've got to connect pipe or drill pipe, and so you've got a drill bit that has to go down. We're going down 2 miles below the earth. That is just, you know, look out and identify what is a 2-mile marker. We're going that far down, and then we go 2 miles sideways. And
so you go 2 miles down and then 2 miles sideways to actually hit some of these oil deposits.
Yep.
Is that the right terminology? Oil deposit?
Reservoirs.
Reservoir?
Depositories.
Right. Yeah, I'm only half smart. All right, so 2 miles down, 2 miles sideways. But when you do that, how do you know that you're going to hit it? That is like the big question that when I see this, I'm like, I didn't realize it was 2 miles, first of all. But second of all, like the pinpoint accuracy to hit this stuff, how big is the reservoir? And like, do you ever miss?
Yeah, you definitely miss. And that's okay. There's so many awesome capabilities and guys and girls in this industry. But to ensure you don't miss, you want to have a damn good drilling engineer. But at the same time, you want to have someone on his team that's an operations geologist. So the drilling engineer is really kind of the quarterback, ensuring the drilling is done safely, prudently, and efficiently. And really, we've got a great drilling. I mean, our drilling engineer, I'm going to go and brag on him. One of the things I really liked is when you have a certain KPI, which is a lot of drilling engineers like to go fast because that's you can measure. Well, if you drill too fast, then you're going to drill a janky hole. And that means when you're producing it, the pumper is going to have a harder time. So you really want a humble individual that is a high performer. And that's exactly what we've got. His name's David Dean. He's an awesome human. And I was incredibly impressed the first time I had breakfast with him is just his humility. And I've seen it in action where he's a good communicator because it's intense, you're moving fast. So the drilling engineer is really setting that kind of framework for how do we do this right and ensuring the roughnecks, the tool pushers, and then the directional company. So what a directional company does is they literally are a service company that has the technology to measure where you are. So you're down 2 miles, and we're actually going, some people are going to 3 miles.
Is that because there's less oil closer to the surface now? Like we've been going and getting oil for a while, and so we have to keep going deeper and deeper to find more of these reservoirs?
It's not just deeper. So it really is this amazing study of human ingenuity. So historically, you would drill down and you didn't have to drill. Like there was oil seeps on the ground and people were like, oh, where's the oil on the ground? Let's put a hole there.
Yep.
And that was like a novel concept. And then a liquid battery came out. And people were like, oh, great, we can make this into productive. And that obviously ushered in the Industrial Revolution.
That's when I would have been successful in the oil and gas industry, is when you could just walk around and be like, oh, there's oil, put a hole there. Like after that, I'm out.
And that's where, people are like, oh, Bitcoin, it's crazy. I can't, oh my gosh, this is like magic internet money. It's like, guys, literally people used to imagine trying to explain oil and gas to someone like, hey, we're going to go drill a hole and a liquid battery is going to come out. Oh, and we need, inflation adjusted millions of dollars to go to like West Texas. That is the flattest. Someone literally conceptualized an idea in their mind that underneath that were mountains of oil. And, that obviously ushered in the Industrial Revolution and helped us win World War II.
When you see that happening, is that why people in Texas are so predisposed to what I'll consider like the American ideals and ethos, because there's a lot of alignment there, but also why they're so predisposed to being receptive to Bitcoin?
I think it has a lot to do one, capabilities. If like what we've done, like going 2 miles down and 2 miles out, 3 miles out, that's really challenging. That takes a coordinated effort of several types of employees, services, consultants, companies. And so really when people are like, oh, Bitcoin mining, it's so hard, what the oil and gas industry has done is light years. It is the most advanced capabilities companies in the world. I mean, we have overcome, you're talking about offshore going down, several miles, then hitting the seabed floor, then going down, another 5 miles. I mean, these are orders of magnitude more complex projects than anything the world has faced. So to me, it all comes down to capabilities. We, in the oil and gas business, we've seen individuals overcome significant obstacles to power our modern world. And really, again, kind of goes back to like, we will never run out of oil molecules, period, full stop, end of argument. We might run out of economic oil. And I think that goes back to Julian Simon's principle of cornucopian economics, which when oil goes up, it's saying two things: find more of me and compete, so find more of me or find another resource to compete. Mm-hmm. So when oil was running out in 2008, or gas was running out, we were literally spending billions of dollars to import natural gas. And then what happened? Some dudes out of West Texas and the Barnett Shale said, hey, let's drill sideways. Let's apply innovation. Let's apply technology. The price signal has gone up. The incentive is greater. Boom. So we're not running out of natural gas. We got way too much. And I think the same thing happened with the oil business. We were running out of oil, and then everyone's like, oh, we did it with gas. Can we do it with oil? Hell yeah, human innovation was applied. And oil would be significantly higher had we not had the culture we have in America and the property rights to unleash that innovation.
You mentioned Julian Simon, and I didn't know who that was until you were telling me about him. And I think, quote that you used was, Julian Simon is the greatest economic individual that no one knows, right? He's the greatest economist that no one knows. Mm-hmm. So Julian Simon is the greatest economist that no one knows. Who the hell is Julian Simon?
He really was the antithesis to the Malthusian idea that we have too many people on this planet. So really, he took the stance, and he made a famous bet on kind of the future of commodity prices, where he said, look, in the long run, all commodities trend towards zero because of human innovation. And I think history has shown this multiple times. So he wrote a book called The Ultimate Resource, both The Ultimate Resource 1 and The Ultimate Resource 2. And really, he popularized and really conceptualized these ideas that we don't need top-down management. We need more people. And so really the greatest resource is the human mind. So we need more people. We need more people with more ideas equipped with liberty. And so, one of his quotes is our company quote, where it's like, individuals equipped with liberty and freedom, they can exert their will on, their ecosystem, and there's this mutual benefit that we all, and I think this is played out. I mean, I like the example of going back to whaling. Literally, the whales were going extinct because of whale fat, and that was used to power the world. And then somebody found this thing called kerosene, and all of a sudden, the whales didn't go extinct. that was not out of the goodness of their heart. There was a better product, let the market compete. We saw this at the same time with people were deforesting Europe to power. They were using wood. That is archaic, and they were deforesting all of Europe. And then all of a sudden, someone was like, they were designing boats to go to America to pick up wood and come back. And then all of a sudden, coal was discovered. And that helped to where we didn't, deforest everything. So I think when people talk about CO2 or, emissions, this is not something society hasn't faced. And in fact, the people that are going to solve it are the individuals with resources endowed with liberty and capabilities at the oil and gas companies.
What's fascinating to me about you is you're very well educated. You have this very sympathetic view towards the oil and gas field worker. You understand the importance of the actual people on the ground doing the work, keeping the American economy powered and running, and building this huge economic machine the world's never seen before. But at the same time, you run a business, and you run a business in a pretty unique way compared to the rest of the world. But you've got a couple of folks that I think you've kind of gotten a crash course from. And Charles Koch is one of them who, when I say that name, most people think of politics and donations and all this kind of stuff. But they actually don't know that Charles Koch and his brother have built one of the largest, if not the largest private company in America. I think it does, $100+ billion in revenue a year. And when you actually start to unpack how they did that, the MBA that you can get from simply understanding how well run that organization is, how principled that organization is, how they treat their employees, how they treat their partners, how they treat their leaders, is unlike most companies in America. So maybe talk a little bit about that organization and what you've learned from them, and maybe Charles himself.
Yeah, Charles Koch will go down as one of the greatest philosophers and business leaders and philanthropic leaders the world's ever seen. Really, I'm incredibly blessed. I was posting libertarian-ish things in 2016, 17. I always try to be very respectful. And one of my friends called me and said, "Hey, you clearly don't have enough friends. Why don't you come to this dinner?" And I went to this dinner, and it was a dinner sponsored by Charles Koch's philanthropic group called Stand Together. And at that dinner, I met my wife and I showed up. We made 8 other individuals who really cared and weren't just LARPing and complaining. It was, there are problems in the world. What are we going to do about it? And so I that was just a supercharge of wow. These people, it was an incredibly diverse crowd. Everyone had different ideas, but there was no complaining. It was, how do we get better? And so then, started going to these events called Stand Together. And I just remember interacting with everyone at this philanthropic group and being incredibly impressed with, even a little thing, like one time a whiteboard fell and one of the employees from the very far back came back, grabbed the whiteboard and put it up. And I was just like, how is everyone such a high performer here and so respectful? And there's also, I'm a member of Stand Together because it's one of the easiest organizations I've ever felt about. It was just such an easy win to join.
What is it, Stand Together?
So Stand Together is a philanthropic organization that is focused on backing social entrepreneurs. So really what Charles Koch and his team did was they developed capabilities over decades on how to build long-term value. And profit matters, but it's really, we think about things in a binary way of for-profit, not-for-profit, and I think that's a flawed dynamic. And really it's culture. How do you build culture? So I had no idea what company culture was. I'd never thought about it, but I remember I was meeting with, and what his philosophy is really market-based management or principle-based management. And it's apply basically what made America great, and then apply that to any ecosystem. And so really, when I started interacting with the Stand Together people, I also got introduced to some former executives from Koch Industries, and they just spoke the most truth and wisdom. It was just like unbelievable on the knowledge. And I was all, my dad was, his dad died in a young age and he just had to work. And his whole life he felt like he was trying to survive, even though he built a massive business, but he loved working. So he instilled in me this just like, hey, be effective, get stuff done. And it was so fun to work with my dad towards the end of his life because I kept reiterating, it's hard going through change. I was trying to change stuff at Choa But he started to see that I got to take time off, reflect, build philosophy, heavily influenced by market-based management, and stand together in Koch Industries and apply that to not only my personal life, my business life, my philanthropic, of how do we create mutual benefit through society. And specifically, I'll never forget, so I was arrested my senior year of college. It sucked.
What'd you do?
I got in a motorcycle accident in a parade, and I hurt some kids, and that sucked because I was making kids smile before that. But I got to go to jail, and I'll never forget. I walked in feeling really sorry for myself because I was charged with the DA basically said, we're going to charge you with 3 counts of aggravated assault. And I was like, Dad, let's fight this. That's like, look, I messed up, but like felonies? And that was one of the first times I saw my dad cry. And my criminal defense attorney was like, you can't win this, Gideon. You have to plead down. And it was also, so anyway, I go into jail and I tell the story and people's like, how long are you in there? Like 3 hours. But my 2 white parents who love each other, who raised me, and I had an awesome criminal defense, they took me to jail. And so when I came out, it didn't happen overnight, but I realized, wow, this system's really messed up. And imagine if I didn't have the financial resources I have. So I got interested in criminal justice reform. That's actually where I first got introduced to Charles, and his philosophy is I saw that he was interested in criminal justice reform. And then, years later, I get invited to see him, and it was just like an amazing thing.
What does he do around criminal justice reform?
Okay, so really there's something called the First Step Act, which basically it equipped people with the resources to get thousands of people out of jail who should not be in jail. So our criminal justice system is totally screwed up. That there's no doubt, but it's so big. How do we? I mean, we talk about America, which is a dichotomous relationship of like, okay, we're the freest nation in the world, but we also incarcerate more people than any other nation. Like, that's insane, and that's a problem, and it's one of the greatest travesties of our time. And so I also like criminal justice reform because it's mutually beneficial. There is no tribe. Like, okay, you're a Democrat. Okay, you like criminal justice reform, lower the amount of time for nonviolent drug offenses. And then, you're a Republican and you are fiscally conservative. Well, prison is a really expensive way of making people worse. And so Charles and his team, a guy named Mark Holden actually was Koch's general counsel. And he approached Charles and said, hey, this is really screwed up. I'm a lawyer. I worked at a jail. I want to change this. And so Mark spun out, started developing capabilities up in Washington. And really for decades, they built resources, relationships, and were prepared. And a few years ago, there was a woman named Alice Marie Johnson. So Alice, she's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. And she was in jail because she got put in a bad situation. She was a grandma, her mother at the time, and she sold drugs. And she approached, and it was her first time ever offense. And the DA said, "We're gonna punish you." And she said, "This is insane. I'm not doing pleading down to 10 years or something like that." And so she fought it, and they punished her. They sent a message, which is, "Do not fight the system. Take your slap on the wrist of 10 years." So she was set to be in jail forever. So anyway, we threw a fundraiser. My wife and I did to kind of incubate some criminal justice nonprofits. And I remember seeing a video of Alice Marie Johnson played at my house. And she's just this sweet, sweet lady. And she's talking about she messed up, but how she's sorry. And I gave this speech at my house, I think it was 2016, about how I'm, 17. I was like, everyone in this room, I invited all my parents' friends, all my Bitcoin friends, all my oil friends, like anybody that's curious and had resources. I wanted you there. And actually, Parker Lewis orange pilled me that night. Thank you, Parker. But it was really fun. The mayor. Yeah, and it was so fun because I got to bring in so many people that it wasn't about Bitcoin. It was about how do we elevate human prosperity, and here's an injustice. And I remember saying everyone can have a small impact on ensuring people like Alice, and the jail wouldn't even let her video in. We had to play a recording. And I was like, everyone can have a small impact on ensuring people like Alice get out of jail and also stay out of jail. And then like a year later, I'm at a Stand Together conference hugging her. How'd that happen? Well, how it happened is because I was a very, very, very small part of elevating a dialogue. My wife and I were. But really what people don't fully appreciate is the First Step Act was about to die. There were some people held up on it. And I remember the night it was held up, I was texting Mark Holden, some leaders that stand together, some leaders at Americans for Prosperity. And I was like, hey, how can I help? How can I help? And I'll never forget, Mark was like, Gideon, we've been preparing for this moment for a very long time. Appreciate your feedback. And they got it over the finish line. They got it done. And it wasn't one individual. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't Charles. It was a coordinative effort, but all the groups I was talking to were incubated by Charles Koch. Mm-hmm. So anyone who got out of jail, they don't give a damn who got him out of jail. So really, and President Trump signed that. He pardoned Alice Marie, and Alice was the inspiration. I mean, you got to bring her on. She was literally, I don't know if you've ever been to jail. It's really dehumanizing. And I've been inside of several jails multiple times with my wife working on some, it's just dehumanizing, and no one's getting out of that better. I mean, you're not even allowed to, when COVID, you couldn't even hug your daughter. So there's a program called Girls Embracing Mothers, Gym. And, it's so sweet. My wife and my kids made these blankets or got blankets, and it was so hard to get them into the jail. But when we got them inside the jail, the mothers got to spend time with their daughters and work on a little project together. And
and it's the humanizing element of it.
Yes.
That basically when you do that, all of a sudden now you bring back not only for the mothers, but also for the daughters. Right?
And that's where Brittany Barnett has a quote that I steal a lot of quotes, so I try to give people credit.
Sorry, none of them are original.
But it's like, it's not just one person goes to jail, the whole family goes to jail. Mm-hmm. So we're taking people, we're moving them, we're placing them around. And, we need, my brother's a recovering heroin addict, and that doesn't happen overnight. Mm-hmm. It's a lack of community. It's all these things. So we have to keep the families together. Yeah. And we have to think about that, and that should be considered.
I do think that this is a really interesting place maybe that our society's in, right? So it's very well documented, the challenges with broken homes and the lack of two parents and all that. And I'm always careful to say, some people arrive at that situation by choice. Some people arrive at it not by choice. They're put in that situation. And so however you get there, you get there. And I think that there's a lot of work that's being done on, what can we do to help these families that are there, whether they chose to be there or not, we need to help them. But also there's this interconnectedness of, we live a sedentary life. People are not out exercising. They don't eat healthy. Well, why are they not eating healthy? Well, they probably don't make enough money in many cases to actually be able to afford healthy food, right? Then all of a sudden you add in things like the mental health issues, but are the mental health issues because if you just were by yourself, you would have the mental health issue, or is it because we're poisoning brains with social media and electronics and devices? Then you add in criminal behavior and then drugs and you start to build this picture where you're like, hold on a second here. There's a lot of issues that people face in society, but are there 1, 2, 3 different things that if we just tackle them, we actually can have a first principles solution, right? So, and I think a lot about criminal justice reform. I've had people on who are public defenders. I've had people on who have been in jail or in prison. I've had people on who are lawyers who help put people in prison, right? And FBI agents, all these different people are in and around this stuff. And when I pull back for a second, I think to myself, you got to attack it from both sides, it feels like. You got to have what I call the Band-Aid solution. Hey, you're already in the situation. We can't go back. Let's get you out, right? How do we actually help you given the situation you're in? At the same time, how do we have a first principle solution to prevent the next wave of people from ending up in the same situation? And I think as I've learned about this stuff and talked to a whole bunch of different people, one of the things everyone agrees on is we got to have a society where there are a set of rules. What those rules are will be debated, but there has to be a set of rules and it has to be enforced. And that some people's vision of that is lots of rules. Some people's vision of that is almost no rules. But somewhere there's got to be rules and they've got to be enforced at whatever society agrees upon. But what it feels like is in the pursuit of individuals trying to do their job, they end up making decisions that they don't understand the repercussions. And I think a lot about, the drug laws is probably one of the best examples where we have people who are sitting in jail for literally a decade plus for nonviolent possession in some cases. And each story is different. Each, kind of detail is different. But when you look at that one situation, you're I don't think that's what actually the people who created the laws, I don't think that's what law enforcement, and I don't think that's what society intended to be the outcome. But we got here, and so unraveling it's way harder than creating a situation. But it feels like some of the work you guys have done, and Charles and kind of his organizations are doing, is like trying to attack it from both sides. Is that a fair way to think about it?
Oh, not just both sides, all sides.
Okay.
I mean, I think that was like, if you're a curious individual and you care, you want a better world, it's incredibly overwhelming. Where do we start? Okay, well, if I help in education, well, then you still got criminal justice or mental. But I think that was one of the coolest things when I walked in to Stand Together is there were type A, get stuff done people in every arena. I'll never forget one of the first guys I met. God, I forgot which state he was from. It was somewhere on the East Coast. He was like, I didn't like the school system in my state, so I had the resources to do something, so I built a competitive school. Like, and I'm just like, oh, what? Like, that's possible. And I think that's what they're, setting a good vision is really important, and like giving everyone like, hey, how do we work on this, and let's all start trending. And I think one of the things you talk about is these rules in society, and I think that's where many of us are trying to popularize. Look, there's for-profit, nonprofit, but that's too black and white. Things are complicated. So we're trying to build out this framework of top-down solutions versus bottom-up solutions. Mm-hmm. And I think, an example is, the oil and gas business. I mean, why did the shale revolution, the energy renaissance happen in America? And it's because and Russia doesn't have bottom-up solutions. Mm-hmm. Saudi Arabia has better rocks. There are way better rocks globally. California has some of the best. I think that Los Angeles Basin has the highest oil per square sedimentary foot in the world. West Texas doesn't have the best rocks. So what do they have? They have a culture that equips they have property rights, which gives a line of sight to change. So there isn't one person in America dictating energy policy. There is a bunch of entrepreneurs who are equipped with profit and a vision of creating value. So I think this idea of bottom up can be applied. It's the same thing. Like we have federal draconian drug laws. Get rid of them. Let the states set what that should be. So I think, which kind of goes back to the philosophy I was working on, which my wife told me to not talk about it, so I won't. But how do we have a different conversation, which is not for-profit, nonprofit, what's kind of another good example is like COVID policy, the federal, there were federal government, hey, let's do this, and it's like, hey, what does the community want to decide? Mm-hmm. So I think getting the closer we can push decision rights to the individuals, it can be scary, but we know what's best for our lives. So, and I think that's kind of another reason why I like Bitcoin mining on the grid. Grids are getting more complicated, and you had top-down federal renewable mandates and incentives that have absolutely distorted the market and reached chaos in grids. That doesn't mean renewables don't have a place, but Bitcoin mining is a bottom-up solution that can help balance grids. And I think, right now, utilities are some of the slowest. They all know this. Slowest, most archaic. And then you got us, ratchet Bitcoiners who are like, hey, we're going to come in and change everything. And it's scary. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we've got to start. And so anyway, I just like that framework of bottom-up solutions. So
this bottom-up solution, I think, is really interesting because every company started bottoms-up, right? Even the ones that are planned in boardrooms or with large investments or spin-offs or whatever, it's individuals with an idea who are willing to invest capital, time, and energy to build something they believe the market wants. And in a capitalist system, the market is the ultimate feedback machine. It either wants it or it doesn't. And I think that there are many people, Vivek Ramaswamy is a good example, who's been on and talked about, we now have people making decisions at companies that are not about the market. It's not about economics. It's now about how do I fulfill these other mandates? And his point, I'll paraphrase and hopefully don't get it wrong, is your job as a company is to make profit for your shareholders. Focus on that. That does not mean that you should destroy everything else and not worry about everything else. But in many cases, if you are optimizing for the highest amount of profit for your shareholders, that leads you to invest for R&D purposes, because over the long term, you have to be innovative. You have to drive change to your business. You have to actually go ahead and develop things. You actually want the best people. And so everyone ends up not looking alike or having the same background, the same experiences, right? All these things that I think generally society is like, hey, that's a good idea. His point is if you focus on driving profit, the market kind of drives those changes faster than actually having these top-down mandates. And my favorite example is minimum wage. Minimum wage in America is still $7.25. And it's been that way for over a decade, almost like 13, 14 years now. Amazon pays close to $20 an hour as their minimum wage, like 17 and a half, 18 bucks. We have politicians that are advocating for minimum wage in America to go from $7.25 to $15. $15 is already behind. Because guess what? One of the largest employers in America is already paying $17 and a half, $18. By the time the politicians get around to making it 15, Amazon's gonna be paying $20, $21, $22. And so the market has done a better job of moving minimum wage than the politicians have. And so it's an argument that like, well, actually maybe what we should do is remove minimum wage and allow the free market to go ahead and operate. Because guess what? If you go talk to a restaurateur right now, they're not talking about minimum wage. They're talking about, I used to pay a dishwasher $12. There's a restaurateur here. I won't use his name because he's scared to come on the podcast. But he told me, he said, look, we used to have dishwashers $12 an hour. Then I started offering $13, $14, $15, $16, $17. I can't get anyone to show up. I can't get someone to stick with the job. And so guess what's going to happen? He's going to keep raising the price of what he's going to pay that employee until he finds someone who can do the job. And that free market dynamic to me feels almost exactly what you're talking about of like this bottoms up approach. Let the market operate. And if you do that, usually you actually arrive at the solutions faster, even in a socialist, a communist, a democratic, a capitalist society, whatever. The top down is not only sometimes doesn't achieve it, but it's slower even if it gets there than the market itself will actually determine, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great example of, bottom up. And I think, of course, I think we can both agree there is some laws, people, businesses, individuals can take advantage of others in weakness. But I think that doesn't mean that, we shouldn't. I do think that minimum wage and many of these things, we can set a better framework to where it's like, look, and I think it goes back to the fiat system of like, and that was one of the weirdest things. I was like, I hate inflation. Like, it is the most evil thing, and it punishes the most disadvantaged. But it's really, really hard to talk to a single mother struggling to pay daycare of, hey, you know what you should hate? The Federal Reserve and quantitative easing, So I think that's been a humbling thing as well of like, there are really tough discussions. There's a huge education need. And yeah, just a general lack of incentives to change. But I think, even, a business, profit matters. And I think profit is allows for more sustainability. But I talk in terms of the purpose of our business is to create long-term mutual beneficial value, because there's a lot of stuff, and we're a private company. So I don't give a damn about the next couple of years. I'm thinking 10, 20 years out. How do we do what's best in a mutually beneficial way for our company and its stakeholders? But when you think, when I change the lens to value, we're a very philanthropic organization. That does not help our short-term profit, and it probably doesn't even help our long-term. But I think we in society, business leaders, individuals, people in the field, we all have a moral obligation to think about people and the communities we operate in. So I do, and I think that's one of the problems with a public company is they don't, they've got thousands of people that can bark, oh, you did that, and it's short-sightedness. So I do hope to see many, many more companies staying private and with a smaller ownership base to where you can effectuate and really be more attentive to mutually beneficial value creation.
Do you think the American economy would be better off if we had all private companies or more private companies than so many public companies?
Absolutely. One of the problems in, just a general archetypal problem in society is this high time preference. And I think cheap money has accelerated that. So I think when you're public, you have a very high time preference. You are focused on the next quarter. I cannot imagine over the last few years, some of the conversations and the pressure that's been going on in boardrooms with ESG and, mandates and other just crazy chaos. But I think if more companies can stay private and not focus so much on how do we get big fast and debt, debt can help, but it's also very, very dangerous. And so I think the more companies that can, not be so, the American dream is not, the billionaires of the world who came from nothing. It's the guy that came from India who came here, got a job working at a big company and can go back to visit his parents and has a few kids and he gets to go take them to Disneyland. Like that to me is the American dream. My granddad was the American dream. Like he came from nothing, he overcame adversity, and he's created a ton of value throughout society, but no one's ever heard of him, and that's okay.
Talk about Choa, the business that your family runs. It's got a fascinating backstory in terms of how you guys get to where you are. How did it start? What was your grandfather's story?
So my grandfather, when he was in 6th grade, his dad passed away. So he had to go to work. He was the breadwinner for the family, and was forced to become an entrepreneur. And so really he worked at some big companies. He worked for General Crude out in Wink back in like 1921. Had 200 employees. He used to go to the train station with armed guards to pick up the cash that would pay the guys every 2 weeks. But he then became an entrepreneur. He saved up and he bought a small drilling rig. And he started contract drilling for some of the guys out in East Texas during the East Texas boom. And really, my dad was birthed in the East Texas craziness. And so my granddad was terrible with money. He found a lot of oil, but then he went bankrupt multiple times. So really, but he was able to provide my dad a really good education. My dad got to go to high school, and then my dad got to go to college and get an MBA. And so, but my dad grew up in field operations. He had immense respect for all the guys in the field because he lived it. He saw it. And so there was no one sharper than my dad on the whole, how do you get oil out of the ground? Because he lived it.
And how important, right? Like to me, I always think of like people who end up rising to run these organizations. Like he built a body of experience. He built a body of knowledge from doing the work, right? And it feels like given where he was able to take the company over time, it was built on almost like an apprenticeship model, right? Of like, I actually have done this. And when I talk to these employees, I know exactly what they're doing because I did it myself before I ended up getting into the leadership position, right?
There was not a single person. We used to say my dad had 50 direct reports because he talked to everyone at the company. And we all knew he was the smartest guy because he'd done it. Every single thing he was telling someone to do was something he had done. All the way soup to nuts from prospect to pipeline, my dad lived it. And I think that was, it was just great seeing that growing up. And my dad built a huge business.
And so talk a little bit, as he's going through the field operations, he's kind of growing. How do we get from him doing the work to eventually building the big company?
So really, when my dad was 29, his dad passed away. And I've got the balance sheet. It's like abysmal. There was a couple $1,000 in the bank, and then there was like a $10,000 or $50,000 accounts receivable, and then like a $30,000 accounts payable. And it was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and his first 5 years he was just trying to survive. And then really, my dad, like I said, he got his MBA. He learned finance. We almost moved to Midland, Texas. But he decided to stay in Dallas because that's where investors were. And so, my dad started out doing a third for a quarter, which was kind of an early private equity-ish structure for oil and gas guys.
How does that work?
So really it's, you find an investor, the doctors, the lawyers, and they put up a third of the money to drill the well in exchange for a quarter of the ownership in it. So it's kind of like a front end, private equity structure to where, hey, we'll put up $1 million, but then the operator or like a Choa would keep a quarter ownership. So there was an incentive, and you could structure this all kinds of ways, but day one, you got skin in the game. And my dad would always keep, at least 50% of his deals. So he just milled it. He knew what he was good at. He drilled about 50 wells a year for the last 10 years of his life. He just, even on his deathbed, he passed away from cancer. He was just militant. He was wanting to drill one more well. And we were like, please don't drill this well. And, we'd been growing our team, and everyone was, my dad was just one of a kind, one of the last true wildcatters. So we drill, we're spending millions of dollars, and we drill this well 6,000 feet, and we had problems. And I was like, hey, Dad, there's problems. Let's call it. He's like, Gideon, this might be my last damn well. You slide the rig and you drill that hole. And so that's what we did. And then we drilled another 6,000 feet, and it was a dry hole. And at the same time, we had a bunch of unplugged miners, and he was just screaming from his bed. I mean, he wanted to be with his family, and he wanted to ensure that I did not become a country club bum. So.
Was that a concern of his? Like just in general of like, you've built something and you know that you're going to hand it over to the next generation. And the joke is always, the first generation builds it, the second generation keeps it going, the third generation gives it all back, right? Of businesses across industry. Is that something that you guys talked about over the years?
Many times. The third generation losing it is something that has been hammered into me. And so I think, my dad did a really good job he never told me go into the oil business. He was like, I love the oil business. You go figure out what you love. So of course, I said, I'm going to go do my own thing. But I'll never forget, I sat down to get some feedback and just wisdom from a guy named Hans Helmerich, who was like a third, fourth generation guy who professionalized a massive drilling company called Helmerich and Payne. I was like, hey, Hans, I'm thinking about going back to work for my dad. You work for your dad. Can I come up to Tulsa and just pick your brain? He goes, absolutely. So I flew to Tulsa. He introduced me to all the guys at his team and, different divisions. And then that night we went to dinner and Utica Square. And he was like, Gideon, we talked, he instilled wisdom. And then finally he's like, look, Gideon, no one has a more vested interest in your success than your dad. Mm-hmm. And he was like, you can go work somewhere else, but your dad's going to care way more than anybody. Mm-hmm. And so even though my dad and I didn't communicate effectively at the time, that was like, oh man, okay. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna go back to work for my dad. I had a vision, a strategy. I pitched my dad. He said, great, let's go. And so, that was some of the most blissful years, was just running around the Permian. I didn't have a damn clue. I mean, our board approval process was, me barking at my dad, hey, we got to buy these leases over in Howard County or Dawson County. And then if I yelled loud enough or had enough conviction, then he'd say, okay. And that was our approval process.
It's funny because recently we had a deal. We made an investment years ago, and the founder sent me an email and he goes, we're doing a transaction on Wednesday. It's like on Friday before. I'm like, okay. Is it a good transaction or bad, basically? And he goes, in this deal, you guys are going to get some money back. So you made some money, but you have the option to roll forward 30%. And I only had one question for him. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm rolling mine. I'm interested in rolling then, right? And there is this element of like the skin in the game, the conviction level, the signals that actually other people will give you. Now, do I know it's the right decision or not? No, I have no clue. But that's about as strong of a signal as I'm going to get out of any of the other data points I could look at or any of this stuff is somebody who's near it, in it, and thought about it more than I have and probably will. What are they doing? Do what they do.
Yeah, and I think that's another. I've been humbled many, many times, but I think just experience. I think a lot of us, information, social media is so liquid. We see a lot of things. We want things fast, high time preference. But I've been humbled by a lot of the mistakes I've made. And there's just something, I read a lot of books. My father is famous for saying, Gideon, quit your book shit and put oil in the tanks. Because I have great theory, joke. But yeah, that just experience. And I think one of in the wake of my dad's passing, it was just so humbling how much he was handling. And, I just I was naive. And I think, I do miss the fighting and but we always respected each other.
When he passes away and you step in, you take over the whole business and you're going to run this thing. Like, what is that transition period like? And what I think is interesting, people hear about business transitions. They hear about the second or third generation taking over like the family business. I don't think people quite understand the shit that goes on in this, right? You're usually, especially private companies that are family held, that usually they got pretty good records, but maybe it's not as good as a public company, obviously. The teams usually end up deferring to whoever like the patriarch or matriarch of the family is. Like there's these dynamics to it. What was your experience like kind of stepping in to run the business?
This episode is brought to you by 8 Sleep.
Good sleep is a game changer, and the 8 Sleep Pod is the best sleep machine. I sleep on it every single night. A great night of sleep allows you to be healthier, be more rested, and have more energy throughout the day. And on the brand new 8 Sleep Pod 3, you can sleep as cold as 55 degrees Fahrenheit or as hot as 110 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the secret of thermoregulation. Better sleep, better energy. Get yourself an 8 Sleep. You can go to 8sleep.com/pomp today to go ahead and get $150 off your order. 8sleep.com/pomp. Not only do I sleep on it every night, it literally changed my life, and I begged the founders to let me invest in the company. 8sleep.com/pomp. Go get yourself an 8 Sleep Pod and get a better night of sleep.
Well, we're still 1 year in. I'd say we're still deep in a transition, but
Okay.
really, I was very lucky. We sold a deal in 2016, which is when I took time off and got into Bitcoin mining. But I, co-founded this Bitcoin mining company, learned a ton that I was so unaware of. And then when we sold that in I think like 2018, 19 maybe, I basically came back to my dad and said, hey, and at the same time, I'd gotten an education on company culture. So I was like, hey, Dad, I am now equipped with a dialogue or a language. I really want to come back to Choa. You run the whole thing. What if we built a management team to support you? And so really this idea of like, let's build a team to support you. And, my dad was in his 70s, and years before, he wasn't ready to slow down, but he was really like, when I had that conviction, I had the vision, I had a lot more professionalization, I agree. And so I basically pitched him on, let's change company culture, more into, kind of what I've learned, but also, you moving from authoritarian, tell everyone what to do, to give feedback. And of course you can overrule everyone, but just a general, let's shift and get some decision rights off your plate. Mm-hmm. And he was very open to that. It was hard. We hired a third-party intermediary. But so luckily and really the goal was a couple of years, he was going to slow down, spend time with my mom and the grandkids. But then we found out he had cancer, and 3 months later he was gone. And so it happened really fast. But if we didn't have that management team, if we wouldn't have the foresight, if I hadn't gotten plugged in to stand together, I wouldn't have had the capabilities. If I didn't have the support of my wife, she's actually worked at big companies and is super professional. So she's given me a lot of feedback. But also,
Wives are good for that.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, my wife and I are so values aligned, it's unbelievable. And she slows me down and it annoys me, but it's a good annoyance.
Yep.
And so really my dad and I already had officially structured some things in place mechanically, which was no dividends are going to come out of this company. We're pretty hardcore committed to long-term value creation. So when he passed, it was very clear that, my family and I talked about, hey, Lloyd, Dad did everything. Do we sell the business? And I think if I wouldn't have met a lot of the people that I've mentioned through this, we would have sold the business. Mm-hmm. But I, thankfully, with my family's support, they were like, let's do this. So really, we decided to double down on, technology and culture and really, really hard things. But my brother Caleb, he'd spent, he was trying to find himself. We're all trying to like run away from our fathers and all that. But, he got some great experience at some other companies and got an MBA down at Acton. But before my dad got sick, he was, we called him like chief of staff, but really he was my dad's bitch. It's a joke. Okay, might need to edit that one out, but I love you. But really, Caleb coming on, he had skills I didn't have. I'm like always, if I wouldn't have been born into a wealthy family, I'd be, a theoretical physicist or a PhD like professor. So I'm very focused on theory and philosophy. That's very fun for me, setting a vision. But my brother and my dad actually told me years ago, he was very mad at me, and he goes, your brother needs to run this company, not you. Mm-hmm. And, that's like kind of hard to hear. But, and I don't know if my dad was trolling me or if he was, 100% confident.
Was he right?
Absolutely. My brother has so many capabilities. I mean, and it's been an awesome example of complementary capabilities. So, my brother's just a better communicator than I am. And he's very focused. I mean, even I was like, hey, I'm gonna go to this other, event here in a couple months. He was like, how is that going to create value for Choa? And I was like, damn, I hate hearing that because I love going to conferences, but he's a really good sounding board. And, I really respect his opinion, and he's gained a lot of the respect. I mean, he doesn't have to, none of us have to, continue running the business. We do it because I don't have any hobbies. I like building stuff. And my brother, Caleb, but also just the support of my brother, Luke. Like I said, I'm really proud of my brother because he's got a daughter, he's leading, and, we've had a good relationship for the last year, and even his support and him, showing up to the Christmas party and Luke comes into my life and just spits mad truth. Like in college, he was like, Gideon, people are scared of you. And I was like, oh, well, I thought I was really nice. And he like, the principle of solicit feedback, he's been doing that for a long time. I mean, he says it like it is.
But you need people like that in your life.
Yeah, 100%. I think soliciting feedback, and even, going back to one of the just mind-blown aha moments for me was, so I talked about, the Koch organization stand together, how they created immense value and liberated thousands of people out of jail. So I was at a Stand Together event, and I saw Charles, and he's got bodyguards around him, and I'm kind of slowly trying to say hey to him without getting, making eye contact. The bodyguards, make sure they don't shoot me. But I got to just shake his hand, and I said, hey, Charles, I'm Gideon. I just wanted to say thank you. And the first step back that night, I was texting and emailing with all your organizations and just how much it meant to get that across the finish line. And he goes, oh, Gideon, I really appreciate that. Is there anything I could be doing better? And I was like, no, Charles, like you've built massive philanthropic, you've created immense value. All your employees are fulfilled in their job and reaching self-actualization. But just one of the most powerful men in the world asking me, kind of a pleb, how can he get better? Just that. So that was like,
holy shit.
Yeah. And my wife and everyone in our company always gets annoyed when I come back from these conferences because I come back ready to we're not doing enough. How do we do more? But yeah, that idea and, solicit feedback, I think it is because it's a slow fade into whatever good or bad things, you don't wake up one day and you're a heroin addict. There was something that occurred decades ago. And so I think that's what I'm trying to get distilled, in our kind of family values is solicit feedback. My kids are amazing at it. And I ask them, I think there's we can learn a lot. I take life very seriously, but my kids, I always ask them, hey, what could I be doing better? And they're like, just come play. And I have a son with Down syndrome, and it was really hard to hear that you're having a son, the firstborn, my son is going to have Down syndrome. That was really hard to hear. But I got feedback from another parent who has a child with Down syndrome. They're like, Gideon, you're going to come home someday really stressed. The world, business, life, whatever. That kid's not going to give a shit. He's just going to want to play.
Yep.
And I was like, oh my God, God gave me this gift of this child. And my son, his initials are MVP, Micah Von Powell. Babe, we made the right decision with that name. But he's the MVP.
Was there a debate?
I wanted to name him Acton Von Powell, V-O-N. And my wife's like, that is like German for of. That makes no sense. But I'm like, yeah, but it sounds badass. And then, but then we settled on Micah. I just think that's a cool name.
Yeah.
So
MVP is pretty good initials.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about the company culture, because you've mentioned it a couple times, and I know the Koch Industries is very well known for being intentional about creating company culture. What did you learn from studying that organization and those leaders, and then how did you actually change? Because it's interesting, right? You didn't have a company culture that you started from scratch, and you're like, this is the way it's going to be. You had to actually kind of build the plane while in flight, which can be much harder than just starting from scratch. So walk us through, what did you learn and how did you actually change?
Yeah, I'll never forget. There's a guy named Dale Gibbons who was head of Koch Industries HR. He's seen stuff and he's just got so much wisdom. And he was like, all right, Gideon, you got to go write down your principles because your principles inform your culture strategy. And then everyone has a culture, whether you know it or not. So when I started thinking about these concepts, of course, I'm like, all right, I'll just copy what Koch did. Well, that didn't really work because we're a different business. We're more wildcatters, and we want to think a little bit, we can't copy paste stuff. So I, started writing and, okay, we want humility. We want respectful communication. But I'll never forget, I wrote down all this stuff. I was like, hey, Dale, I did the hard part. I wrote it down. It's like, oh, Gideon, that's cute. Now you got to effectuate it. And I'm like, okay, yeah. What book can you give me? And it's just there's experience but yeah, so really what we've tried to do is move away from, my dad was a legend and he was the smartest guy. So he just told everyone what to do. And I think that's how every company starts with kind of an authoritarian type A, get stuff done. But if you want to be successful in the long term, I think slowing down and really being intentional with your company culture is the most powerful way. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, bring a team. And so I think, we try to develop principles that would inform, you set the vision, which is where are we going? The mission ties everybody to the vision, but then your culture strategy informs how you get there. And principles are really the framework to inform that. And so, and it's not just, like we have them written down, but we, again, Hans Elmerick, I asked him for feedback, and he was like, yeah, Gideon, company culture is everything. And he was like, I talk about it with my guys. What are examples? How can we get better? But yeah, I think soliciting feedback, respectful communication. We're everyone in the world. We're in very fast changing businesses, our daily lives. And so one of the things that's really hard is to tell someone how they can get better. And so what we try to do is pair up. These are all dynamic, but it's like, okay, solicit feedback, which invites someone we all know we're good at. But how do we tell people, hey, here's an area you can improve, which is very delicate communication. And so that's where I took a lot of lessons from my mother, which was my mom would always say, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I think that was just like the most powerful. So we talk about respectful communications. And I think there's a book on Netflix's culture, and what they said was say things with positive intent. And so I think we try to really emphasize, look, one, everybody should be inviting feedback. How do we get better? What do we learn from it? But then also, how do we respectfully communicate that is, I think, because nobody wants to be told what to do. But if you invite in, how do I get better? It's just a lot more palatable. And also just, continuous learning. I mean, that's kind of one of the biggest things. I mean, every single energy company that is not thinking about Bitcoin mining as it relates is wrong. They need to be getting feedback. This is the most revolutionary energy technology. But if you don't have a culture that invites continuous learning, then you're just going to, this is the way it's always been done. Okay, great. That's what Blockbuster did. Where's Blockbuster? And so I think this is another concept of, creative destruction. Let's identify businesses and strategies that can disrupt our own businesses. And because I want to know about those before, it becomes a thing. And I think that's where Bitcoin mining is like the greatest thing ever.
Why do you think Bitcoin mining is so disruptive and innovative, specifically for the oil and gas industry? I think a lot of people think of Bitcoin store of value. They think of it as a medium of exchange. They think of it as a speculation tool in financial markets. But you're specifically talking about this intersection of Bitcoin mining and oil and gas being such that this like match made in heaven. Why is that?
Capabilities. And so really what Bitcoin mining is a lot of things, but it's the democratization of energy innovation. So if you wanted to innovate in the power sector or in the energy business, you needed to be independently wealthy with billions of dollars, or you needed to work at a massive corporation. You're going to work at that company for 10, 20 years, and once you control the purse strings, you're probably not going to innovate near as much. So what Bitcoin mining did is you leverage several principles, which is, bottom-up solutions and skin in the game, permissionless innovation. So anybody globally now can be an energy entrepreneur. I mean, literally, you can have, there are no barriers to entry. You can rub 2 nickels, and if you can plug in an ASIC, you can innovate. So we are all thrown out. I mean, I remember 3 years ago, we were like, okay, what's some of the best, from a first principles standpoint, what's the lowest cost energy? Okay, it's waves. Okay, well, the biggest, most consistent waves are in the middle of nowhere. Sweet, let's take the Bitcoin mining there. And then really there's all these engineering tech, and this is what we were studying 5 years ago, was there's these engineering technologies that are in energy or energy technologies, but they're engineering successes, but they're not economic successes. And so what Bitcoin mining does is it gives anybody a line of sight to profitability. And so really, like, I like this, the App Store. Before the App Store, if you want to innovate in software, you needed to work at a big oligopoly or get backed by VC or something like that. What the App Store did was it democratized innovation in the software business. So all of a sudden you had a clear line of sight to profitability if you could innovate. And so the same thing with the Nakamoto of it basically just sent a private, a signal to the market and said, if you lower the cost of power, then we will give you more capital. And so really Bitcoin mining is the most beautifully savage venture capital company. And it's focused on one thing and one thing only. If you lower the price of power, you get more Bitcoin. You get more resources in your success. And so we're going to see this iterative process play out for the next century, usher in a Kardashev type 1 society, but really you've democratized it.
Bitcoin is a venture capital fund, is not something that most people have thought about. Explain that further.
Yeah, so this idea was popularized by a guy named Jesse Pelton, who worked on Hollow Ranch with me on the, and really was one of the pioneers of demand response in Texas. So yeah, basically, venture capital looks at what are disruptive things, and then how do we give capital and make asymmetric bets. And there is, everyone wants to think, oh, it's an efficient market. It's not. You got to know people. You got to have the networks. So there's all these people that have been disenfranchised because they didn't go to the high pedigree schools. And so what Bitcoin Mine does is it strips out all emotions, all relationships. The only thing that matters is if you lower the price to power, then you get to you spend less on your operating expenses go down, which means your profit margin goes up, which you get more capital from the Bitcoin network through the the algorithm that releases blocks every 10 minutes. So you get more resources. And so if you have A over here that can get power to 5 cents and B over here, which innovates and gets power down to 2 cents, well, B is going to get more profit and has more resources, and then we'll redeploy that. And so I think this is very early, but you're seeing it, all of us, and now we've got this great. I can literally get on my phone, and I unfortunately do this too much. Oh, well, that's a great idea. Who are the experts? Like we were looking at wave stuff 3 years ago. Oh, they're all like in Europe, in London. Okay, great. And I literally got on with 3 of the world's experts on wave turbines, just like that. And so I think not only do you have liquidity in the capital markets with Bitcoin now, you don't need to have cool relationships, communications. And so I can hop on and find experts on any idea and then, throw shit against the wall and see what sticks.
You mentioned that Bitcoin will have an impact on civilization as well. Describe what you mean there.
Whew, how much time do you have? I think it, I talk about Bitcoin in 2 frameworks. One, it's an energy revolution. And 2, it's a human freedom revolution. And so if you we have the greatest financial markets in America, full stop. And because of that there's a high amount of trust. So the higher trust can be, the more value that's created. There's a company called Trust Ventures. That's like literally their concept. Thank you, Brian and Sal. But really, if you can elevate trust, but globally, that doesn't exist, and so Nigeria, Venezuela, you hear about these places, they don't have trust in their financial systems and they can't save. So and now with the Lightning Network and other innovations on Bitcoin, if you wanted to, savings is very critical to elevating your family out of abject poverty. But if you're living in an inflationary environment, that's impossible to do because you're always trying to, saving is easy, investing is hard. And so really what you just did is you democratize savings with Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So anybody can stack sats, anybody. All you need is a cell phone. And cell phones are super cheap thanks to innovation. And so really you've got all these disenfranchised developing nations with individuals globally who now have an opportunity to save and knowing that the value they're saving cannot be printed away. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is going to play out over the coming centuries where, America is the land of the free and it was created by dissidents who left the old world. And I think there is massive amounts of dissidents globally. And now you've given them the greatest human savings technology, anti-fragile technology. I mean, nobody can shut it down. So I think this is going to play out and equip families and individuals and I think that's the beauty of and need for education in the market of like Bitcoin, unless you're like a Ron Paul audit the Fed person here in America, Bitcoin is difficult to grasp. But and that was one of the greatest things. A few of us were invited to the Human Rights Freedom Forum in Oslo a few years ago, and I'd hosted dinners with my American friends. I'd hosted all these events trying to bring education, and Alex Gladstein orange-pilled a lot of people at some of the events I'd host. But it was always like, yeah, but I don't need, it was always a brick wall. But when I went to the Oslo Freedom Forum and I was like, oh, hey, here's what Bitcoin does. They're like, okay, great. How do I get that? Like they wanted it, they need it. So innovation happens on the fringe. So I think that's where, the Lightning Network and everything that's happening, the innovation isn't going to happen in America exclusively. It's going to happen where the people need it most.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about 20, 30, 50 years from now, what does that look like in the world? Is it running on a Bitcoin standard and it's like hyper Bitcoinization? Is it Bitcoin is a savings technology and people still have other assets that they're investing in? Like, how do you think about it full well knowing predicting 50 years out is nearly impossible?
Yeah, and so I have an opinion on the energy side, but on the just broad, Bitcoin is not just a money, and I'll use the analogy when people came to America. Why did America become so powerful? Why was so much wealth created here? And I think you tie it back to property rights. So when people came to America, they could own land. And the founding fathers could never have conceptualized, apps and social media. So how did we get, well, really we had land. And on top of land, which is like the base layer of Bitcoin, people built farming. People built shops, built real estate, but then they built an LLC, a corporation. Like those are layer 1, 2, 3 on, of land. And so none of that was possible. And then the internet comes along and supercharged it. So when I think about the future of Bitcoin, to me, it's an elevation of the principles that made America great. And so it is taking, the United States Constitution and enshrining it into code to where it set a vision. And it gives more clarity and confidence to if you create value in the Bitcoin ecosystem, it'll be mutually beneficial. So I think there's a lot of fascinating, Bitcoin's going to intertwine with all our lives in ways that we can't really conceptualize, but we'll be able to run things in a decentralized manner, on layer 2, and I'm even hearing about layer 3 that's just way over my skis. But on the energy side, all taking the history of the oil and gas business. I mean, one of the most fun things is the oil and gas business was pioneered by the Texans. I mean, full stop. And one of the most fun things is talking to some of these, field guys or, guys that have traveled the world. And really what happened was the training occurred in Texas, and then we exported those capabilities globally to where, we were like developing oil and gas reserves around the world, but it was largely led by the capabilities and strategies developed by the Americans and largely the Texans. And so the Bitcoin mine is going to play out the same way, where right now Texas is the most important and relevant ecosystem, and really goes back to principles. And so ERCOT, and this was so fun. My best job was I got to travel the world talking about how great Texas and ERCOT is. And people are like, oh, it's too hot. It's like, look at physics. You're all wrong. It doesn't matter how hot it is. It's humidity, particulates. But really, ERCOT has the most bottom-up solutions, free market solutions of any grid globally. And really, when you look at the history, it's like, okay, Texas is known for its oil and gas reserves. What's the largest wind resource, wind production capacity? Oh, it's Texas. Okay, why? Well, it's because there were few barriers to entry, and the grid was set up in a way that allowed for bottom-up entrepreneurs with a line of sight. That's not happening on the federal level. That's not happening in other RTOs where they're regulated and they're monopolies. And so you saw this mass value accretion out in West Texas, which is the convergence of the wind and solar belt. And so really, now we got 18 gigawatts of solar being added next year. That, and the IRA absolutely did what it was intended to do. It supercharged the economics of renewables. Mm-hmm. And so really over the coming years, renewables have their issues. They're the lowest marginal cost, so they have a place, but they also are unpredictable. And so Bitcoin mining is this perfect load. So all the capabilities, regulatory framework, and protocols that we're developing in ERCOT, we need, there is a sense of urgency. People want to get plugged in, but you're talking about ERCOT, which is, a lot of people have been hired away, and you've got a convergence of Bitcoin miners needing power, more wind and solar. So huge amount of resources are needed at ERCOT, and they're doing the best they can, and they've done an amazing job. And so really everything we're learning on the regulatory framework, we're going to export that globally, and we're already seeing it happen. I mean, there's some innovators in Kenya that are doing demand response. And so that's what I see, but ERCOT, we need to be thinking about doubling the peak capacity over the next couple of decades, and Bitcoin mining is a beautiful way to help balance that out.
You also told me that West Texas is going to dominate the future. Explain that.
Yeah, I mean, when God created the world and put Texas down, he ensured that everything, all resources and, everything was made for commerce and for industry and for high quality of life. And really, I'll never forget when we were thinking about putting a Bitcoin mine in West Texas. This was 2017. Nobody had done that, and everyone told us, please don't do that. And we said, we hear you, but we disagree. But I'll never forget, I was trying to get feedback for some of the people because there were no services, there were no capabilities. We're talking about building in Pyote, Texas, which is more than an hour west of Midland. There is very little out there, but the oil and gas companies were out there. They had services, they had capabilities. So I called an electrician 5 o'clock on a Friday, and he called me back around midnight. And I was like, hey, thanks for calling me back, but it's late. Why are you calling back? And he says, this is a goddamn oil patch. I'm 24/7. And I was like, man, that is a Bitcoiner. He just doesn't know it yet. Mm-hmm. And so West Texas is going to dominate, not just because of the mass amounts of the wind and solar belt and natural gas. There's these capabilities and this culture of be effective and get stuff done. And so really the Bitcoin miners are going to continue to come. And everyone talks about sustainable energy and its needs, but we have to focus on, is this profitable? Because that's a critical component of sustainability. And so when you're looking at the hyperscale data centers or latency agnostic data centers, they're running out of resources in Northern Virginia, Washington, Arizona. You can't, and it used to be 10 megawatts. I remember the first time I told a data center guy I was going to build a 100 megawatt substation for a Bitcoin mine. He was like, that's the biggest thing I've ever heard of. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I don't know what's big and small, so that's what we're going to do. But we're moving towards gigawatt campuses in the data center industry. And so really, people talk about sustainable energy. They're purely on the electrons, West Texas has the highest amount of wind and solar of anywhere outside of a few hydro. So when we talk about, sustainability, we need to be industry consumes at least 50% of global energy. You got to be thinking about sustainable industry. And there is nothing more prolific than the wind and solar and natural gas resources of West Texas. And so as more 18 gigawatts of solar coming on, and it's projected by 2030, there's going to be 74 gigawatts of additional wind and solar in West Texas. And so the Bitcoin miners are going to continue to increase their amount of gigawatts they're consuming. Well, then they turn off when people need it more, and then they're consuming through the troughs when no one needs it. Well, that's going to stabilize the grid, bring on more reliable and affordable energy. And then, the data centers, and we've actually had 2 different data center companies approach us and I was like, whoa, I thought this was going to take a decade, but they're seeing that we can get gigawatts in one location. Mm-hmm. So, and there's some other resource constraints over in a high population area. So you've got this convergence of a willing and able workforce, the largest wind and solar resources, a convergence of them, so a high capacity factor, and then Bitcoin miners increasing their penetration rate to be able to effectuate more reliable and affordable power. And I think this is something that's going to take time. So we did a grant to help on the training for Bitcoin miners. We partnered with Texas State Technical College. That was a grant my wife and I did, and that's going to be taking place for just Bitcoin mining. But the long-term vision, and we're already having conversations, is how do we build out the services and capabilities that data center companies need? And I think there's a lot of complementary capabilities. Managing a gigawatt Bitcoin mine and a gigawatt data center are not the same, but they require similar capabilities. And I think that's what's so fun is the oil and gas field workers of West Texas, they know how to get shit done. And really, you don't need a college degree to be a technician at a data center, but it pays really well. And so, talking about the Roughnecks, one of the hard things about being a Roughneck is you're always chasing the drilling rig, and you're on all the time and you're missing your kids' events. And it's a hard life, but you're doing what you got to do to survive. So the idea of we can put a Bitcoin mine or a data center and all of a sudden that's stability, that's economic development, that's jobs that is going to be coming to West Texas. That's I do this job for free. And I think that's what's going to play out. Again, there have literally been data center companies that have approached us. We're like, whoa, we're not ready, but let's have a dialogue. How can we get better? What can we do to ensure this happens? And, state agencies and other philanthropic groups, we're all getting involved in, again, ensuring the resources are ready in the coming 5 years.
You mentioned earlier that you read a lot of books. I pride myself on reading a lot of books as well. How do you pick what books you're going to read next?
Well, I used to read a lot of self-help books, and I'll never forget, I was in Midland, and it was Friday. One of my friends called me and said, where are you? And I was like, oh, I'm at the bookstore. He was like, oh, God, what aisle? And I was like, self-help. And he was like, Gideon, please. So I read less self-help books. I'm reading one book on coaching that I really like. But I'm really interested in stories now. I think as I've I'm not old. I'm only 35, but as I've gained wisdom and experience.
I'm 34. You're old as shit.
I know. I was going to make a joke about my wife, who's a beautiful. Anyway, I will not make that joke. Sorry, but
what kind of stories?
People that have overcome adversity. I think it kind of goes back to, I don't know if you can see it. I got a chip on my shoulder. But I think there are so many cool people in this world that didn't have the chances I had. And I was seeing my dad die. It really re-architected my mind. Mm-hmm. And I want to be involved in a small way of, really ensuring, and going back to when I was arrested, I was in a really dark place.
Mm-hmm.
The internet people are mad and all that, and you got people hate. But my dad looked at me and he said, "You messed up, but I love you." And I think, really just stories of the underdogs who had people that believed in them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the coolest things. And so I think, thinking about, okay, we can continue to start foundations. How do we start businesses that, and I bought this one picture of a buffalo. And my dad, as he was passing, my brother-in-law shared this story about when a buffalo sees a storm, they don't run from the storm, they run into the storm. And the buffalo we have socks that say "into the storm," and it's just become this really good story. And my dad took cancer head on, but really I bought this painting or this picture of this buffalo, and I showed it to one of our geologists, Mike Dropkin, and it was so fun because he brought a new light to it. I liked the picture of the buffalo because it's standing in the snow and it's miserable. And I think that's what, when there's chaos, when you're in a Fimbulwinter, Bitcoin's collapsing, oil's collapsing, that's really hard. But if you can be peaceful and reflect in those moments, you can create a lot of long-term value. So that's why I bought it, was to show this buffalo just clearly in a snowstorm being peaceful. And, but what Mike talked about was see the snow on its head? That's because a buffalo will see a white landscape and then they'll go put their head in the snow and they'll ruffle around to look for patches of food. And I thought that was a great metaphor for how we can approach people. If you were to, meet someone, you don't know that person's story. So how do we slow down in society and really get to know, people's stories, humanize individuals? And I think that's a huge opportunity for businesses and venture capitalists and private equity is to look, do you check the box? Maybe not, but get to know people, spend time and understand this guy overcame adversity. I was meeting with a guy earlier who literally came from India, knew no one, and got himself into college and then got a master's degree. Knew no one. And his parents, didn't, immensely help. But he came to America and he struggled to get in venture capital. And for what, I'm not exactly sure on the reasons, but it's just I'm sure it's difficult. He's got an accent, but he's brilliant. He's ambitious. It's funny too, because he really wants to help people. And he didn't even, growing up in India, he didn't know venture capital was a thing. He was like, oh, I thought only rich people invested rich people money in other rich people friends. And he was so he was on course to be an engineer, and he is a degreed engineer. But then he discovered venture capital. He's and he didn't use the word mutual benefit when I first met him, but he's he can help people in a for-profit, mutually beneficial way. And so anyway, that's his vision, is he wants to start or join a private equity venture capital firm to give guys like him opportunities. And even though, I'll go on a rant on immigration, it's insane. We disincentivized immigrant entrepreneurs because you have to be beholden to the HB1 visa and there's tons of technology individuals getting laid off. They have 60 days to find a job or they have to leave the country. That's insane. America was founded by immigrants. That is a terrible top-down policy. So any politician that's listening, you've got to re-examine that. How do we have bottom-up solutions and ensure that the right people are coming into this country, but how do we equip to allow for those are the OGs of entrepreneurs, are the people that overcame adversity. And then that translates, if you came here, you overcame adversity, that translates incredibly well to running a startup. Mm-hmm. And same thing, I think that's where same thing with criminal justice reform. I think a lot of Bitcoiners are familiar with Ross Ulbricht. Look, the guy made mistakes, but he's admitted it and he's rotting in jail. That's fucked up. That is that is an egregious. And there are so many more people like Ross that are sitting in jail that could have been that were entrepreneurs. And I think that's one of the things. My dad, I saw him love the oil business, and that was my North Star, was find something I'm passionate about. He had a business, and that affected me. But for the individuals in society who grew up seeing someone sell drugs or whatever, that's all they know. So to lock those people in prison is an egregious violation of human rights. So I think history you reflect on history, and you can look at who empowered the dissidents. America empowered the dissidents. We created a lot of wealth that way, and huge mistakes were made. So how do we continue to look at who's the most disadvantaged in society, and how do we empower them? And I think, the Black Lives Matter push kicked off a few years ago, and I'm already seeing a change in media. Like, they got out, they said, hey, there's not enough of us represented in society. I mean, I watched like 10 trailers the other night. Every single one of them had a hero that represented the Black community. And I think that's the power of a vision. So I think criminal justice reform, empowering those people behind, you can't even start a business if you're in prison. That's wrong. Like, people in prison should be able to start a business that could benefit their families. I mean, they can learn to code, to program. I think it's the same thing. So I think empowering immigrants, empowering, individuals that made mistakes, I think that is a one way to unleash prosperity and mutual benefit through society.
It's a fascinating idea for people sitting in prison with a bunch of time on their hands, lots of opportunity to spend time learning, to trying things, right, if they could start businesses. Yeah,
and I've actually, a few of us very individuals that really want to effectuate change, we take a playbook from Silicon Valley. If you don't like something, you can try to operate in that framework. And I think, like Uber did this. They're like, okay, can we compete with the taxis? I don't know. Let's just go do it. And so I think that's one of the most fun things we've been talking about for years. And it was one of the most fun checks I've ever written in my entire life. A few of us a few years ago decided prisons are messed up and we can spend millions of dollars and not change the laws. What if we started our own prison company? So I literally set out to start a for-profit prison company, which people hear that and they're like, oh, for-profit, that's bad. It's like, look, do you know what the incentives are? The for-profit prisons are incentivized to keep you in prison. They make money the more people that go to prison. And so there are huge unintended consequences. So it's not our for-profit prisons bad, our non-profit prisons bad. It's culture, it's strategy, it's incentives. So one thing a few of us, this was not my idea, a lot of us like, what if we started a for-profit prison that it wasn't paid per individual, it was if we lowered the recidivism rate of that individual, we got a delta on the back end of that profit. And I think that was like an interesting KPI. So that was a few of us had that idea, and then a few got feedback. A few of my friends were like, look, Gideon. And this was pitched to a few very wealthy individuals that everybody knows, and they all turned it down because of optics. It's like, we can't be seen investing in a prison deal. I was like, look, I'm Gideon Powell. I don't give a damn. This will effectuate human prosperity. Let's figure out how to do this thing. And so just been putting that idea out there. And a few months ago, I got introduced to Brian and Social Profit Corrections, SPC. And it was so unbelievably energizing. He worked at a prison. He saw the atrocity. He kept trying to get more resources to the mental health, because basically we all feel sorry for kids and trauma when they're kids, but then they reach a certain age and it's like we keep feeling sorry for them and we throw them in jail. And so I think that's where one of my proudest investments. And so anyway, Brian pitched me on so he registered as a 501c3. And I was like, look, I really want to do this as for profit. He was like, here's why that's a bad idea. And the optics. And so, but he's like, look, and this is when I was like, oh God, I have to write this guy a check and I love it. He's like, look, Gideon, as a nonprofit, we'll have a lower cost of capital. So we'll be able to outcompete all these for-profit companies that are bidding on contract. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not supposed to do this, but okay, here's a 3-year commitment. $250,000 a year. Let's go. And people, and
so how does it work? It's a nonprofit prison.
Yeah, it's an operating nonprofit 501c3.
Okay, and there's a physical location, obviously.
Nope, no, not yet. Okay. So that was another thing. It was like the architecture. We need to reimagine. Like, look, yes, people messed up and that should matter, but when you walk into a prison, how do you design a building can absolutely affect your mental disposition. So what my long-term vision is to literally buy raw land and build, prisons from the ground up with an intentionality towards, getting the extra sunlight, making it. And this is not something you'd start with low-level offenders. and learn. But it's like day one, when someone shows up to a prison, we want that person to know, look, you messed up, but you're a human and you matter. And to have, these capabilities within the prison. And that was another, I was very angry. I wanted to change society. And so I was like, okay, when I can have financial resources, I'm going to hire attorneys and represent nonviolent drug offenders. And that was, kind of why we got involved in with Brittany Bardette and the Buried Alive Foundation. But people used to say, well, Gideon, and rightfully so, people had concerns over that. They're like, well, what happens when they get out of prison? And I used to say, I don't give a shit. Let's just get them out. Not a good answer. And that's where you've got to think multidimensional. It does matter. How do we get everyone who shows up the resources and the opportunity to better themselves? And I think that's what Brian's vision is he's worked at a prison. Like, I'm a nerd who has an idea. Ideas are cute, but there's way too many of them. How do you execute? So Brian has operating capabilities. He's layered in some mental health capabilities. And I think that's what I'm most excited about in the next multi-decades is the convergence of criminal justice reform and mental health. And that's something that's very passionate to my wife and I. And so I think, that was Brian's vision, was like, and nobody wanted to be the first check. Everyone loves to follow. And so really my experience in Bitcoin mining and trying to raise money a little early was nobody likes to be the first. So I think that's informed I think one of our capabilities is like, if we can see your vision, you have complementary capabilities and shared values, like, let's go. And so anyway, we road checked to Brian. He's been traveling. He's meeting with other investors. But yeah, he wants to day one, and I've been connecting him. Just send him on emails. Hey, here's a mental health profession, the Meadows Foundation. They are the experts in mental health and how do we get better. And mental health, you're dealing with multi-generational trauma. That's what largely is feeding the industrial prison complex. And so that's what Brian's going to do is he's looking to win a contract and manage a prison. And there's a huge need for that. And even he was like, hey, he texted me like, hey, there's a prison for sale up in this area. I was like, great, let's try to buy it. What can we do? And so that's kind of where he is. He's up and running. He's trying to bring in more investors.
What is it called?
Social Profit Corrections. I think it's like spc.org.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it's just a slight tweak. It's not a for-profit, but it's going to create mutually beneficial value through society. Mm-hmm. So writing that check was like one of the just awesomest things. And it's mutually beneficial. I'm a nerd. I want to try crazy shit. And I want it to work in the long term, but I can't do that myself. Mm. So I think that's the beautiful thing about communications. Share a vision. And it was the same thing on that deal I did, my wife and I did for education. I was on a panel at a Bitcoin Commons event in Austin. I said, hey, I don't know how to build education stuff, but we'd like to support something at a college or a high school or whatever. And then a few months later, someone was like, hey, we hear you like this idea. I was like, okay, great. Y'all have capabilities. I don't. Mm-hmm. So yeah, just putting ideas out there. There's plenty to do in this world.
There's a hell of a lot to do. Where can we send somebody to find you on the internet if they want to find out more about what you're doing in energy with Bitcoin mining or with some of the philanthropic work? I tweet, so Gideon O Powell, and then I also post a lot of memes on LinkedIn. You're a LinkedIn meme maker.
Yeah, I think, and if anyone at LinkedIn or Microsoft is listening, y'all guys don't support GIFs. That's a huge problem. And additionally,
you're a thoughtful meme maker.
Yeah, we have to. I think, and I parent with memes. I think memes are so powerful. There's a lot of stuff I struggle to communicate sometimes, but I can effectuate a very clearer way of thinking with my mimetic art. And so I think there's a lot. I'll never forget, I was at some Bible study and this guy was like, oh, kids these days are ruining the human language. And I'm like, well, we used to like paint, and he was like talking about how we went from pictographs to, spoken word and written language, and now we're going back with memes. And I was like, dude, I don't know if you've ever made a meme, but like it can communicate things so amazingly more effectively. So yeah, so LinkedIn, support GIFs, that's a huge deal, but also your user interface, like y'all can't, when I try to post a meme, I have to dig all the way through my whole picture album. I can't go to my various meme categories. So I think a better user interface. If you'd like feedback, holler at me.
It just empower the meme makers and you'd be in a better position.
Yeah,
I say it all the time. The memes are the message, right? And if you think the world's richest man or one of the top 3 richest men in the world is probably one of the most lethal meme lords, Elon Musk. And whatever people think about him, he was asked in a Bloomberg interview a couple years ago, would you rather be a billionaire or a meme lord? And of course, it's easy for a billionaire to say meme lord, but he chose meme lord. And I tend to think that you can have $1 billion, but not everyone can make just a fucking awesome meme.
Yeah, I think that's going to shape. I have several business ideas I want to start around memes. Caleb, I'm not starting them this year, but there's so much opportunity to take, from the sports industry and capabilities there and apply them to memers. I think there's a lot. There's just so much to do in this world. But yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I learned something every time I've talked with you. And I tend to think that we need more people like you who believe the bottoms up individual approach to problem solving, the incentives, and really just kind of the continued embracing of the American democratic ideals is incredibly important. So I appreciate all the work you're doing, and we'll definitely do this again in the future.
Yeah, appreciate the platform. So thank you.